Welcome to How to Write a Technical Resume. As I mentioned, we're going to be going through some basics here of the tech industry and resumes. I am Rebecca Ryan. I use she, her pronouns. I am the program director for the University Career Center, and I specifically work with students in computer, mathematical, and natural sciences. So we have a model at the University Career Center where for some of our larger colleges, we have program directors that work within the college and are industry experts that can support with the fields that those students pursue. So if you're a CM&S student, I'm somebody you'll probably be getting a lot of emails from. For those of you who aren't CM&S students, that's okay. I'm very excited to have you all here. We have quite a few program directors across the University of Maryland. And if you don't have a program director in your college, you are still able to work with our general central staff in the University Career Center based in Hornbeck. We all work as one big team to support students. So very hopeful that you all will check us out in Hornbeck sometime. Hopefully you like this workshop. Also, just a housekeeping thing. So I know that we are recording this, which means background noise will be picked up in the recording. So unless you're speaking, please make sure your microphone is muted. And I just ask that you either raise your hand or post in the chat with questions as we go throughout this workshop. So again, just the structure of this is going to be similar to the research resume if you just attended that one, but there's definitely some tech related parts, so it won't be all repeat. We're going to talk about the importance of a resume, including the purpose and why we personalize it. We'll then go into some different requirements and formatting. We'll talk about how you organize a technical resume and the writing structure, and then we'll also discuss other resume events coming up that you can take advantage of. So I want us to think for a second about what the purpose of a resume is. So thinking about like a technical resume, all right? What do you think the role is of your resume? Not a trick question, just want to get some input from the crowd here. What do you all think the purpose is of a technical resume? Feel free to use the chat. Any ideas? You all are here. Why are you here? Why does a resume matter? Good, to show your technical skills and experience. And what's the goal? Why do we write one? To outline your career to recruiters, right? To get a job, exactly. And one thing that I've heard honestly from recruiters before is that the purpose of the resume is to get you the interview. So you really want to be able to highlight everything that you need to share in order to get your foot in the door, right? Make that connection, be able to have that technical task that an employer asks you to do where you can really highlight your skills, to be able to talk to a recruiter, to talk to an HR team or a supervisor about what you're able to do. So it's really the first step. And it's something that a lot of employers will go back to throughout the hiring process as you go through each phase. So you might start out with just an AI review, which is artificial intelligence. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But then everybody's going to keep looking at your resume as you go through, and hopefully it continues to reinforce your strengths in between these different technical tasks and interviews that you might do. So who's the intended reader? This is especially important with a technical resume, okay? Your intended reader might be someone who's an expert in your field. So for those of you interested in who are a computer science major, you might have a computer scientist. If you're interested in data science, and some of our math students in here, right? You might have somebody who's an expert in exactly what you're excited about. But you also might end up with someone reading your resume who doesn't know anything about tech. And so it's important when we're thinking about how we prepare a tech resume that we're considering both ends of the spectrum, right? So those people who are super technically minded, and then also those people who are like, you know what, I'm a really great recruiter and I just got into this field and I don't understand how Python works. And you have to be able to speak the language of both. And so when we're thinking about our resume and as we go through how we're going to organize it and how we write bullet points today, I just want you to keep that in mind, okay? That's a really important part of this, tailoring your resume to the variety of different audiences that might end up taking a look at it. And it's important when you're putting that together that you're able to demonstrate why the experience you have is relevant and impressive. So how is it relevant to the job and why am I a competitive candidate? Into our next slide. I always like to emphasize this because I think it's really important, and especially I saw some folks who have an interest in like machine learning, right? So 98% of Fortune 500 companies are currently using some sort of applicant tracking system to identify who's qualified and unqualified for a job, which means most likely your resume is going to be filtered through some sort of AI software if you are applying to a larger organization. Now, smaller companies may not use the software, but they're still looking very, very quickly at applications. You all know, like, there's a lot of folks pursuing tech from across multiple colleges, even on this call here tonight, right? And so it's a very rapidly growing field, and it's also really diverse. And it's important that you're able to put together a resume that can be very quickly reviewed by a recruiter, and they're able to very clearly see why what you're doing and what you've done relates to the position you're pursuing. And so that comes with customizing your resume. I recommend for students who are preparing a technical resume that you actually put together one very large master resume. So this is like your giant document that every time you do a project or have an experience, you write it out in resume format, and we'll talk about what that looks like. And then you actually put that all in one large template. From there, what you can do is personalize the experiences that you choose to include on your resume so that they fit the job that you're planning to apply for. So you may end up having a version of your resume that's focused on software development and engineering. You might end up with one that's a little bit more focused on IT, or maybe you're interested in being a TA and doing some sort of tech education role. You might have one that highlights your teaching experiences a little bit more. As you go through and get more and more experiences in tech, I really want you to be mindful to document as many projects and experiences as you can so that your master resume is really robust. And then it's just a matter of saving different versions of your resume for the types of positions that you're pursuing. Additionally, when you are pursuing different positions, make sure that you're still specialized or specifying and personalizing what you write about to the specific position that you have in mind. So, for example, one software engineering job might not have the exact same terminology that they are looking for on a resume as another position. So you may even end up modifying your language even slightly for two different positions that have the same title with different organizations. And so that's where, you just want to be really mindful of like looking at the posting, looking at your resume, maybe even having a highlighter or some sort of system to compare. A lot of people use JobScan or different websites to help them see how they match. So there's a lot of different things you can do, but I always like to start out with just emphasizing the importance of being really specific and customizing what you submit to an employer. If you're putting that time into doing an application, it's really important that that application is a well enough match that you're going to be able to make some progress, right? I hear horror stories of folks sometimes applying to like 200 jobs. And when I ask like, well, did you personalize your resume and write a cover letter? Sometimes the answer is no. And so I think that that really helps you work smarter, not harder, right? Any questions about customizing your resume before we move forward? Okay. So just some logistics that I think are important to point out as we move forward in this workshop is to think about your formatting. So make sure that your font size is not below 10-point font. Employers might print your resume out and pass it around, and you don't want them to have to use a microscope to read it, right? So you want to make sure that your font's an appropriate size. I find that as students go through college, a lot of times their fonts get smaller and smaller and smaller as they get more experiences. Yeah, so JobScan is, I just got a question here. Can you share JobScan or resume scoring softwares? I find a lot of students use JobScan. That's probably one of the more popular ones, but I'd love to open it up to students in this workshop if you have other ideas on tools you use to see if a resume is a match. Does anybody else have one that they use, or do you all use JobScan? Okay, so maybe everybody uses JobScan. That's the one I hear of the most when I'm working with students. All right, so back to formatting. As I was saying, 10 to 12-point font, 1/2 inch to 1 inch margins. If your resume is super long and you're a freshman, I challenge you to go back and look at the formatting, because what I find a lot of times is it's like a 12 to 14-point font, and then the margins are like 1 inch, 1.25. You don't need that for your resume. It can be 1/2 inch. Don't go smaller than 1/2 inch for the margin, because then you run the risk of your text getting cut off by a printer. So just make sure, you know, you're sticking to these sorts of specifications. There is typically a guideline of 1 page for a resume. However, if you're incredibly experienced, talk to us in the Career Center. You know, sometimes people have more than 1 page. I think mine finally went to 2 pages after graduate school, but I was told I could have maybe even had it longer a little bit earlier. So I think it really depends on what sort of relevant experience you have. Even if your resume does go beyond 1 page, one, I would say check in with a career advisor, but 2, make sure that all of the important information, like your education, your technical skills, some key experiences, at least end up on that first page in case the employer loses the second page, doesn't notice it, doesn't look at it, those sorts of things. In terms of high school experiences, so I'm not sure what year you all are, but if you've just gotten to Maryland, welcome. We're so happy to have you here. It's totally okay to have some of your high school experiences on your resume. I would especially consider any technical experiences that you've done. So if you took like an AP computer science class or did like any sort of website development when you were in high school, feel free to put those things on. But if your resume is over a page, maybe consider cutting some of the things that really aren't related to the role at all. And then just make sure you have a clean and consistent format, especially with tech students. I've been noticing lately a lot of like really fun formats where people use like bright colors and lots of columns. And while I know that the typical technical resume is sort of sad when you're just looking at it as the resume writer, I can tell you from experience working with a lot of recruiters that they appreciate that format. The format that has different columns and bright colors doesn't land as well as people typically think it will. Usually it involves the recruiter having to search different areas that are a bit unconventional to try to find basic information that they need to know in order to move forward with the hiring process. Given how competitive this field is and how quickly it's growing, it's really important that your resume is quick and easy to read. So don't put more work on the recruiters by reorganizing things or adding a bunch of different graphics. I would say unless you're going into a field that is graphic specific or involves a lot of art, maybe if you're like an immersive media design major, you might have something cool with your graphics. But if you're just kind of pursuing like a basic sort of software job or something in tech, try your best to keep it as simple as possible and avoid excessive white space, right? Your eye goes right to that giant piece of white space if you're just looking at a resume really quickly. So it's important that you're pretty consistent with your spacing as well. Before I move on, I just wanted to mention that a student also gave another example of a resume software to see how your resume matches a job posting called Resume AI. So RESUMAI. That's another good one that someone's used to see how their resume might match a job posting. Are there any questions about resume formatting tips before we get into like the beef of this, which is the technical resume? Okay, I'm going to move on then. As questions come up, feel free to post them in the chat and we'll acknowledge them. So I want to just start out by having everybody look at this resume together. So let's just take a look at this. And I'd really like you to spend about 30 seconds reading through it. Okay. So we're going to be going through this resume together. This is probably the tool that I share most frequently with students working on a tech resume. I really like this format. We've gotten really positive feedback about this format from folks that we've shared it with in the professional side of things. So this is a pretty good way to structure it. Just to kind of start out with some basic stuff, everybody, you want to make sure you're including your contact info. You'll see Alina Science included her house number, her city, state, and zip code. It's also totally fine to just put College Park, Maryland, your phone number and your email. But another thing that I see tech students put a lot on their resume is a LinkedIn and a GitHub. So within the tech industry, folks are typically pretty active on LinkedIn. So if you don't have a LinkedIn already, please make one. I will happily be your first connection, and I'll post my LinkedIn at the end here after we finish recording. But you know, it's really helpful to have a LinkedIn. You can search what alumni are working at the organization that you're interested in pursuing. It's a really good way to stay up to date on things. I even am a part of like some different LinkedIn groups where they have like different technical interview questions that they'll post as like practice questions for folks to work on. So there's all kinds of things on LinkedIn. It's a really great tech community. I highly recommend it. Another thing a lot of students will put on their resume is their GitHub. It's common for me to see that at the top underneath their name. So similar to like, we've got the location, the phone number, the email, and then they might have like LinkedIn and GitHub right underneath there. But I really want to emphasize that you shouldn't put things on your GitHub that aren't like on your resume and expect folks to like click on that to find it. Because what we often find is that recruiters don't just visit the GitHub right away. We have the benefit here of having a lot of tech-minded students who have shared feedback with me that click rates tend to be pretty low for the links on your resume. So people do look at it, but click rates aren't that high. From an employer side, employers tell me that they typically are looking at links when the person is getting to the final phase. So if somebody is like interviewing with the top supervisor, that supervisor might explore their GitHub in a bit more detail or take a deep dive into LinkedIn. But it's not something that every single employer is looking at. So every time you apply for a job, you may not get a click, but if you get pretty far in that process, hopefully you do. Any questions? Okay.
Sorry, one question.
Yeah.
So is it okay for location to just put like your geographic region, for example, DMV?
I wouldn't put DMV because people might not know what that is. I would put College Park, Maryland.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah. And folks in the area will know, like, oh, okay, College Park, Maryland, that's near us, right? It's not uncommon for organizations to hire students in College Park for like Virginia or Baltimore or like DC positions. Good question. I'll also sometimes see students put like their home city and state if they're looking for a job back home. So like, for example, a lot of students from New Jersey might have a version of their resume that has like their New Jersey address and then one that has their College Park, or they might put like permanent address and then their New Jersey one, and then local College Park, Maryland. So permanent Lavallette, New Jersey, local College Park, Maryland. So the education is also a really important section. You want to make sure that you're putting University of Maryland, include College Park, because there's a lot of different UMDs, right? There's Global Campus, Baltimore County. So make sure that you specify that it's College Park. Put your expected graduation year. So folks typically aren't looking for when you started college. It's not like a date range. It's just when you anticipate getting your degree. Again, it's not a contract. So like, you don't need to, if you end up graduating a semester later, that's totally okay. But it's possible, like it is important that you put your expected graduation date. In terms of your degree, put Bachelor of, and then if you're getting a Bachelor of Arts or a Bachelor of Science, put that. It's not bachelor's, don't put BS. You're not a computer science major. Again, we're thinking about AI here, right? So put the proper name of your degree. Bachelor of Science, comma, and then what your degree is. If you are in a major right now and you're thinking you might change your major, for example, I've had a lot of students who are currently in letters and sciences that are planning to pursue a degree in computer science. Do not put computer science as a major if you are not a computer science major right now. Sometimes employers might ask for a proof of enrollment in college. If you don't have that major, but you put it on your resume and then you send in paperwork for your college and you have a different major, it might appear to the employer as though you weren't being honest on a resume. So it's best to just put what your degree is. If that's College of Letters and Sciences, you can put like Bachelor of Science, comma, College of Letters and Sciences. And then perhaps below that, if you have an intended major that you're hoping to pursue, you might put anticipated major, colon, computer science, or anticipated degree, colon, Bachelor of Science, comma, computer science. But you should definitely say what you are right now as well, so that you're not like seeming as though you're being dishonest on a resume. Any questions about that? That's one that's come up more frequently.
Wait, real quickly, you said you write Bachelor of Science for the LTSC people who want to do CS. So you write Bachelor of Science, College of Letters and Science, and then write intended major would be computer science.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, exactly. It's just a little thing, but it does make a difference when it comes to later if you have to submit paperwork. Right, we want to appear honest to the employers, and it's okay if you're not a CS major yet. Like you will be, and you're giving them the info on both. All right. So sometimes I also work with students who may have come from a community college or another university. If that's the case, just put that college below, and if you earned the degree, put the name of the degree, again written out fully, and when you earned that degree. If, however, maybe you just took some courses at another college, like maybe you took 3 courses at Montgomery College last year, you can put the month and year range for that, and then put like select courses in computer science. It's also okay to put your high school courses. So for those of you who are just coming into college, you might not have a GPA yet, and you might really want to highlight your high school experiences. you can definitely put those on your resume as well. Speaking of GPA, so sometimes students will ask, like, when is a good time to put the GPA? I recommend that you put it if your GPA is above a 3.0. The caveat to that is that sometimes tech employers have GPA requirements for their internships. So it's important that you double check. And if an employer has a requirement of a certain GPA, that you put your GPA on your resume. If you didn't take any technical classes at a community college, but you still went to a community college, it's totally fine to list the community college and just the year range, like the month and year range. Or if you got a degree, write what degree you got. Good question. Any other questions about education? If you don't have a GPA yet, that's absolutely okay. You can just like put like, sometimes I'll see people put like dashes and it's very clear they don't have one yet. That's where I think it is helpful to put your high school on there, right? So like put your high school name and the year you graduated, so employers make the connection that that's why you don't have a GPA. And then you can always put your high school GPA if you want, just to give them a sense of how you did before you got to Maryland. I see that a lot with freshmen. Any other questions? Okay, one more thing I want to emphasize. And I know we're spending a lot of time on education, but I feel like it's something that people typically have a lot of questions about. You can also list relevant courses that you've taken. So if, for example, you've taken some tech courses, sometimes underneath, like on this one, for example, if it's a Bachelor of Science, computer science, they might put in italics underneath relevant courses, and then list the courses with commas between them. And if you're in your second year, okay, so if you're like not sure whether or not to put your high school on there, I would say if you're beyond your second year, typically I wouldn't put it. Second year is kind of like a, let's see how much experience you have. If there's space to put high school experiences, you can put them. And if you have more personal questions about that beyond that, you should meet with a career advisor and we can talk more about it. All right, so moving on to skills, which are super important, right? The format of a technical resume is typically your name, your education, and your skills. So basically you're telling them who you are, where you're coming from, what you know how to use. And then the next part we'll talk about will be how you demonstrate your use of it, right? Which is your experience. But right now we're in the what do you know how to use phase. And that's the skills section. It's really important that you put all of your technical skills on here. However, a caveat to that, if you are not proficient in a skill or if you are a beginner in a skill, it's okay to put that on your resume. If you've never used Java, do not put Java on your programming languages list, okay? Because what may end up happening is you may have to do a task with Java in your interview and it might become apparent to the employer that you don't know how to use it, right? So you want to make sure that you're being really intentional with the way that you're listing your experiences. I'll sometimes see people put advanced : and then they list their advanced ones, proficient, list their proficient ones, beginner, list their beginner programming languages. Typically your skill section is where you put more technical skills. Sometimes I'll see students put soft skills, but it's much more common that you would demonstrate soft skills when you're writing about your experiences and in your bullet points later on. So really this part is more for those hard skills, right? What are those technical skills that you possess? A quick list that stands out to employers so they know what do you know how to use. Questions about that? Okay. So then we get into this category, which is the best one, right? Not only, so you've said like who you are, where you're from, what you know how to use, and now you get to show them how you used it. So this is where I typically recommend getting a little bit more creative with your categories. So you might have a programming experience category, for example. In that, and this is especially true of our early students in tech, okay? So for those of you who maybe are just getting your feet wet with tech, maybe, you know, you have a few experiences, but they're kind of like some class projects, some personal stuff, an internship. It's a little bit of a mix of everything. I recommend creating some sort of section to capture those all together. We're trying to stack your technical experiences so they're as high up on your resume as possible. We don't want the first thing that an employer reads to be, you know, a random experience you had, like volunteering. I don't know. I'm trying to think of something that's like totally not related to tech, right? But we don't want to bury your tech experiences essentially. So let's look at Alina Science as an example here. Her first experience that she has is working in tech services at Stamp. She was a student web developer, and she is talking about how she maintained various web applications utilizing, and we see what tech she used, right? So we're, again, she's naming the technology, which is really important. She said she could use it, and now she's demonstrating how she uses it, and she's actually bringing those terms up again. Each of her bullet points is starting with a verb. Really important action-oriented descriptions, right? So how has she used these things? She also has the location, the dates, the title that she had there, so student web developer, and the name of the employer. You'll notice all of the dates on this resume are right aligned. I highly recommend doing that. It helps your dates stand out and basically creates a timeline for the employer. You'll also notice that the first bullet point in this first experience that Alina is featuring talks about basically the summary of what Alina's role was, right? Then we see more of the soft skills coming out. And the final one is somewhat of an accomplishment, right? Collaborate with team members to effectively staff the department 10 hours per week while balancing a full academic course load. So they're really trying to show, like, why is this impressive? Like, not only was this person, you know, using these web applications, but they were also doing it in a way that balanced an academic course load. Ideally, as you work through writing your own technical descriptions, you'll start out with what essentially the first bullet point would be is like a summary of your project, starting with a verb. Then you might get into more of like the nitty gritty things that you did that were technical in a way that, again, even I could understand. I'm not a computer scientist, but you need someone to test on. You can always test on a Career Center person. And then finally, that last bullet point might be like a key achievement. So you'll see like farther down here with the Over the Sand vehicle project at the bottom, they mentioned that they co-wrote and presented 9-page design report with design drawings. So one other thing that I want to really point out here is that whenever there's a personal or independent project or a class project, the name of the class is provided, or it's labeled a personal project, and then the name of the project is also included, as well as a date range and a location. This is really important, okay? You want to make sure that even when you're putting projects on your resume, you're offering employers the opportunity to understand what the context of that work was. They need to understand what the setting was for you being able to complete those technical tasks. So it's helpful to include whether or not it was for a personal project. If it was for a club, write the name of the club, right? If it was for a class, write the name of the class. If it was independent, say it was independent. That's totally fine. And then name that project. I'll sometimes also see students, like if it was a personal project, maybe include a link to a GitHub up here so that folks can actually look at the project. So that's another thing that you can consider doing. But overall, they're sticking to a very consistent format, whether it's a professional experience, a project, or a class experience. And one really positive thing that that does for you when you're presenting your experience to an employer is it shows how even those class projects or those personal things are professional in nature. Do you have any questions about this? Okay. I also want to mention, like, let's say, for example, maybe you have an experience that is not technical in nature. Maybe you were a server or worked as an RA. That's also totally fine. You can absolutely include those things in your resume. I typically recommend like an other experiences section below your technical experience where you can feature some of those extracurricular activities or other part-time jobs that may not be as tech heavy. So types of experiences you can include, and I already mentioned this, but I just want to emphasize it again, paid and non-paid jobs or experiences, internships, research, if you're helping with any sort of research, or maybe you did a research project for a class, any relevant technical projects that you've done. I've seen people even put like they built a computer for their grandmother and they put it on their resume, but they titled it an independent project and like wrote about it in a very professional way. Honestly, it sounds a little funny to say out loud, but that was a really impressive thing to a recruiter. Other things to include would be like volunteer community service experience. A lot of larger organizations are very community oriented or have some sort of community mission right now. And so those things are great to include. If you have any military experience, feel free to include that, including like certifications that you received, part-time or full-time work, and then on or off-campus activities. So if you're in a dance group, feel free to put that on your resume. It might lead to a really interesting conversation. Questions about this? Okay. So some possible sections that you might have would be related experience, research experience, programming experience, work experience. Leadership is a really popular one for folks who have like maybe TA experience and like some other leadership position with a club. They might like put those together as leadership experience. Oh, sorry about that. You're hearing the dog in my house. And then finally, I want to just kind of emphasize the importance of detail with this slide. So we talked about some alternative experiences you might have, right? And how those highlight really great skills as well. But think about the scope of your work. Even with this example of an RA position, like you see the difference between the first set RA very brief bullet points versus the second one. Resident assistant includes like the scope of the work. So if there's a data set you were using for a technical project, how large was that data set? Did you reduce the time it took to process something? If you had like mapping, how large of a radius were you working with there, right? Give us a sense of why this is impressive and include numbers and metrics for that. Any questions on the resume before we move on? Okay. I want to just, again, put the attendance form in case anybody joined us a little bit later. I think one thing that's important with this is to consider like where you're going to go from here with this resume. So we actually have two really great events that are going to be attended by a ton of tech employers coming up on Friday, September 23rd, which is this Friday. We have our virtual fall career and internship fair. It's happening through Careers for Terps. We have a whole virtual platform. Honestly, a lot of tech companies have started moving away from in-person recruiting for universities because there are so many virtual options. So there are a ton of tech companies that are only coming to our virtual fall career and internship fair. It's important that, you know, you take a look at least, see what employers are going to be there, and plan to attend if there are some that are interesting to you. The other fair dates are September 28th through September 30th. September 28th and 29th are part of our in-person series and are specifically for employers with opportunities in the STEM and engineering field. So those are 2 other days to definitely put on your calendar, plan to come. There's no major requirements, so all majors are welcome. And you can put together a tech resume, right? Because now you know how, hopefully. So you can show up with whatever major you have and highlight those skills really effectively. So if you're a little unsure about how to navigate this, you just go to careers.umd.edu and visit Careers for Terps. From there, you can click on events. You'll see our fall career and internship fair. Another really good one coming up is Pizza and Prepare for the Fair with employers. We're going to have pizza and employers will actually be there giving tips and helping with networking. And then finally, here are 2 other events. So we have a virtual How to Prepare for the Fair happening on Wednesday, September 21st. So join us for a virtual lunch. You can have your lunch ready and learn more about how to prepare your elevator pitch, research employers, and organize yourself before that first day. And then our other event, Pizza and Prepare for the Fair, is also featured here. So at this time, I'm actually going to stop the recording. I know